I've always tried to get synthesizers onto my recordings, partly because I think Jeff Lynne is so cool, and partly because, even though they've been around for decades, synthesizers sound very modern. There's a big part of me that wants a contemporary sound because my vocally melodic songwriting style is so old school. I read an interview with Paul Simon from the 80s where he said melodic vocal melodies were dead, and the only thing people would ever want to hear again were rhythmic vocal parts. And I think he's absolutely right. But I really only write melodic vocal parts because that's my flavor, and I'm always looking for other people who are still into that 50s pop group way of doing it. Anyway, but synthesizers. When I was making my second record, Salutations, I recorded synthesizers on every single song. Then, as I was mixing it, I removed each synth track one by one. They just never sounded right. Playing a synthesizer is easy. Anyone can do it. You just push a button. But knowing how to add it to just the right song in just the right way is very, very difficult. It takes skill, experience, and a great ear. When it came time to record my third album, Lesson In Tenderness, I again was trying to add some synthesizer and again failing miserably. I made that record in Fullerton, California because I wanted to be closer to Sean and Lee and everything happening at Burger Records headquarters, which is a record store they have set up in a strip mall in basically a suburb of Los Angeles. I rented a room in a practice space about a half a mile from the record store where I was living illegally and recording all day and all night. There's really nothing to do in Fullerton, so when I wasn't recording, I'd go hang around the record store and smoke weed and watch Mystery Science Theater 3000 with Sean. We'd spend the afternoon folding covers to be stuffed into cassette tape cases because they do all that by hand. Anyway, if you know anything about Burger Records, you may be aware that they've got Gabe, the singer and songwriter of the band Gap Dream, living in their storage shed in the back. So, by default, I was hanging out with Gabe a lot, and he is a synth wizard. If you want to add synthesizer to rock songs, he's the guy to learn from. I didn't ask him a lot of questions or anything, but I kept my ears open while he was finishing his second record and picked up what tips I could glean here and there. I learned different things he was doing with tone and space and these crazy panning moves he used. Well, after about a month, I got kicked out of that practice space I was living in, which is a whole crazy other story. It just so happened that the day I was getting kicked out, Gap Dream was leaving on a 10-day West Coast tour. They invited me along to play lead guitar, partly because they knew I no longer had a place to live, and partly because I had this sweet 15-passenger Ford van that was in a lot better shape than the vehicle they'd been planning on using. We got their gear in the van, along with all my belongings from the practice space, and then everybody started taking psychedelic mushrooms every single day. Mushrooms are great, and I'm a supporter, but they also make you unable to control your emotions. After a while, you revert to almost an infant-like state. There were temper tantrums, they'd have inter-band fights that would sometimes come to physical violence, and often, there'd be euphoric nights where one or more of the band members would just disappear without telling anyone where they had gone. I developed a regiment where I tried to make sure everybody had their phone and phone charger in their pockets after each show. That way, when somebody disappeared, we could usually find them the next day. I'd drive around, pick up the missing members, and then we'd roll to the next show way past the time we were supposed to sound check, and sometimes past the time we were supposed to play. I was just along for the ride with Gap Dream, so none of this behavior bothered me. It wasn't important to me whether we played the shows or not. Also, this was deep in the period where I was addicted to Xanax, so I was popping pills all day and all night. Then, to counteract the tiredness that came with the Xanax, I kept a couple bottles of 5-Hour Energy drink in my pockets at all times. I'd take a tiny sip here and a tiny sip there and try to keep up with those Gap Dream maniacs and all the extra energy that mushrooms provide. Before we left for tour, Burger Records had gotten these beautiful picture discs of the Drive movie soundtrack. That inspired us to listen to the songs from that movie over and over in the van. I also remember wearing out this beautiful compilation that the band MGMT had done for the Late Night Tales series. If you've never heard it, you should definitely check it out. On it is the studio version of the song Ocean by the Velvet Underground, which is basically a 5-minute drone. Gap Dream Gabe was in love with that song, and each time it popped up on the compilation, he'd say, "Fletcher, can you play it again?" And I'd skip it back to the beginning, and we'd drone the drive away. The Gap Dream tour ended in Reno, where we played a great show in this little art gallery. The next day, we were supposed to return to Los Angeles, but when those Gap Dream boys learned there were $1 beers in the casinos all day and all night, they decided they were going to stay in Reno forever. This is one of the times when I was lucky it was my van we were traveling in, and I could escape whenever I wanted. All of these stories are really just to explain that by the time we got back to Burger Records in Fullerton, I now somehow knew just how to tastefully add some synthesizers to my new record. It was a true miracle. Wilder Than Me is a perfect example. There's the bass sound from the Drive soundtrack, and I stole Gabe's wild synth panning technique. And then there's all that twiddling and glowing and pretty tones that allow Wilder Than Me to come to life. It was a strange song that I initially couldn't see fitting in with the rest of my album, but now here it is, the lead single from that record. I wrote the verses to the song years and years earlier, during a time of my life when I was obsessed with the Slits. I first heard the Slits on another tour. We were traveling overnight across the desert to the next town and the next show. Like most of the vans I've toured in, the air conditioner in this vehicle was broken, so it was much more comfortable to do the hot drives at night when the sun was down. I woke in the back seat, sat up, and noticed the glow from the car's headlights was the only light to be seen in any direction. My brother was driving and Kyle Thomas sat shotgun, and I heard them talking nervously about the fact that we were about to run out of gas. But just above their talking was the beautiful, sparse, ravaging sounds of the Slits. I asked them if I could help find a gas station, and they told me to mind my own business. I asked them what music was playing, and Kyle told me the band's name. And because finding gas was not yet my problem, I laid back down and listened to the desert winds blowing through the car's open windows and the sound of the Slits perfectly layering one vocal line on top of another. Later, I would fall in love with reggae, but before my punk years were ready to embrace those sounds, there was the Slits. The verses of Wilder Than Me came out of this appreciation. I recorded a demo of those verses in 2002. The lyrics were just some nonsense I came up with on the spot. You want it, but the boys don't like it. You like it, but they still won't buy it. Then, 12 years later, these lyrics came back to me while I was fiddling with this goofy chorus about wild women. I'm a shy person. I spend almost all of my time by myself, and I've never really had one clue about how to approach a woman I was interested in. Unless you count quietly standing alone and looking available, which does work every once in a while. I remember a confident stranger once walked up to me at a club and pinched my ass without saying as much as a hello, so I dated her for a while. I've rarely slept with a woman who didn't demand I come to bed with her. For these and many other reasons, I've always had confident women in the driver's seat of my life, yelling at me and telling me what to do and forcing me to have fun when I might otherwise be too timid. This song is my ode to those women. The lyrics are humorously simple, 40 words in total, but I hope that all the wild women from my life can gather from this meager offering that I truly loved them and that I never could have done it, any of it, on my own. You've been listening to episode 3 of Listening to Fletcher C. Johnson. I'm Fletcher C. Johnson. Tour news. I want to play at your house. Yes, you. I'm about to set up a solo acoustic tour that will take me coast to coast, and I'm only looking to play in friends' and strangers' living rooms. It will be quiet performances. It should not disturb your neighbors, and I'd love it if you had me over to your place. Yes, you. Even if you only know one other person in the world who would come out to a show, I would be overjoyed to come to your town. You would have to let me invite a couple other people besides your one friend, but I promise it will be a good time. If you want everyone out of the house directly after the show, I will help make sure that happens. Or if you want to have a raging party after the show, I will party at that party. Please reach out to me at FletcherCJohnsonTour@gmail.com and we can begin making arrangements. I wanted to again thank everyone who mentioned this podcast to a friend or on social media. If you like the podcast, please let someone know about it. Next week's episode takes us to the historic city of Boston, where I talk about violence. Beware, listeners, things get ugly.
We went to kindergarten together.
People get knocked out. Listening to Fletcher C. Johnson was written by me and produced by myself and James Ellis at Public Announcement. Thanks for listening.